There's a number attached to Tom Holland that's worth $1.9 billion. And there's another number, the same actor, the same face, that's worth less than $4 million. Both of those numbers are real. Both of them happened. And the only difference between them is a costume. When Tom Holland wears the Spider-Man suit, he is the safest bet in Hollywood. His films gross hundreds of millions, sometimes billions. Studios build their release calendars around him. Audiences line up for him. But take the suit away, put him in almost anything else, and something strange happens to those numbers. They fall apart. For years, nobody in the industry would say that out loud. They had good reason not to. He was young, he was talented, he was beloved, and the spider on his chest kept printing money. So the obvious question, the one that should have been asked, got quietly filed away. What is Tom Holland really worth on his own without the mask? The answer, the one whispered in development offices and never said to his face, comes down to a single figure. Somewhere around $90 million. That's the line. That's the budget at which Hollywood, very quietly, decided it could no longer afford to find out. This is the $90 million problem. And to understand it, you have to understand how a billion-dollar star ended up with a value that nobody wants to test. This is Stardust's story, where we trace how Hollywood builds its biggest names and what happens when the spotlight starts to move on. Today, the most bankable young actor of his generation, and the one number his face cannot move. To see the trap, you first have to see the illusion. In 2015, Marvel and Sony made one of the smartest casting decisions of the decade. They needed a new Peter Parker, the third one in just over 10 years, and the audience was tired. Then a slight, quick 20-year-old former dancer from London walked in. Tom Holland was not a typical action lead. He'd trained as a dancer since he was a child. He'd played Billy Elliot on the West End stage, dancing 8 shows a week. He moved differently. He had a real, unforced charm and a face that still looked like it belonged in a school hallway. For a teenage superhero, he was perfect, and then the machine took over. Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming, Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man Far From Home. And then, in 2021, Spider-Man No Way Home, which grossed close to $1.9 billion and became one of the highest-earning films in history. 6 films, each one bigger than the last. Each one raising his profile, his paycheck, and the weight of expectation on his name. By the end of it, the industry didn't treat Tom Holland as a movie star anymore. It treated him as a pillar of the entire box office. But here's the thing about that pillar. It was never really holding up the building. The building was Marvel. The weight was carried by the brand, by 20 years of comic book momentum, by a marketing budget the size of a small film, and by the pull of a shared universe. Holland brought his charm and his physicality to it, and he was very good. But not one of those billions belonged to him alone. Not one ticket was sold purely on the name Tom Holland, and nobody noticed, because nobody had to. Until he stepped outside the suit, and the numbers started telling a very different story. Let's go through the evidence the way a studio would. Film by film. Start with The Devil All the Time 2020. This was supposed to be the pivot. A dark, serious crime drama with Holland playing a haunted young man in post-war Ohio, surrounded by a heavyweight cast. The critics were kind. Many called it the most grown-up work he'd ever done. And the film did well, sitting near the top of Netflix for weeks. But read that sentence again. Near the top of Netflix. Because The Devil All the Time never opened in a single theater. It was a streaming release. And a streaming release tells a studio almost nothing about box office. Nobody bought a ticket. No opening weekend was recorded. No cinema chain learned whether real audiences would pay to see Tom Holland in a serious drama. The headline said he'd made the leap. The truth was that the leap had never been tested at all. He was filed away as promising, but unproven. It would take 3 more years for that word, unproven, to harden into something colder. Next, Chaos. Walking, 2021. If the first film was a non-event, this one was a crater. Chaos Walking was built to launch a young adult science fiction franchise. 2 of the biggest franchise faces on the planet, Tom Holland from Spider-Man and Daisy Ridley from Star Wars, in the same film. Directed by Doug Liman, the man behind Edge of Tomorrow and The Bourne Identity. On paper, it could not miss. It missed. Chaos, walking open to under $4 million in North America. It limped to around $26 million for its entire global run, against a budget that had ballooned past $100 million after years of reshoots. The reported loss was close to $73 million. It was, by the numbers, one of the biggest box office bombs of its year. According to multiple reports, the studio effectively wrote the film off during its opening week. Now there were excuses, and a few of them were fair. It came out during the pandemic, when theaters were half empty. It had a famously troubled production. But strip all of that away, and one fact was left standing, and it scared the industry. You had two stars who anchored two of the biggest franchises in the world, dropped into a film that wasn't a franchise, and audiences simply did not care. The names were enormous. The names did not sell a single extra ticket. The quiet lesson the studios took home was brutal. Outside of an established brand, a famous face is not a guarantee. Sometimes it's just a face. Then came the film that was supposed to change the whole conversation. Uncharted 2022? And this is the important one, because this is the one that looks like a win. Uncharted paired Holland with Mark Wahlberg, put him in the boots of a young Nathan Drake, and adapted one of the most beloved video game franchises in the world. It opened at number 1. It went on to gross more than $400 million worldwide. By any normal measure, that's a hit. A real one. His biggest film outside of Marvel by a wide margin? So doesn't that break the entire theory? Not quite. And here's why the studios still hesitate. Uncharted was a pre-sold property. The video games had tens of millions of devoted fans before a single frame was shot. The project had been in development for over a decade, and Holland wasn't carrying it by himself. He shared top billing with Mark Wahlberg, a proven draw for 20 years, with Antonio Banderas alongside them. Even at the time, the trade press didn't frame it as a Tom Holland triumph. Variety described the film, in plain language, as a test of his box office appeal outside of spandex. The reviews were lukewarm, landing around 40%, while audiences who already loved the games showed up regardless. And here's the most telling part. After all that money, the sequel, the franchise that was supposed to follow it, was reported to have quietly stalled. So the verdict on Uncharted wasn't he can open a film. It was something much narrower. He can anchor a pre-sold brand with a co-star beside him. Whether the audience came for Tom Holland or for Nathan Drake is the exact question that still has no clean answer. Which brings us to the boldest bet of all. The Crowded Room 2023. And this one was personal. Holland produced it himself and took the lead. A 10-episode limited series for Apple, based on the true story of Billy Milligan, one of the first people in America found not guilty of a crime by reason of insanity due to dissociative identity disorder. It was designed to do one thing, to prove beyond any argument that Tom Holland had range, that he could carry serious adult prestige material on his own shoulders. The result was painful. Critics were harsh, with the series sitting around 31% on the review aggregators. Variety called it empty. Other outlets called it mediocre to bad. The reviews praised his effort while questioning almost everything around it. The pacing, the length, the handling of mental illness. Audiences were warmer than the critics, but the story had already been written. Holland had bet on himself in the most public way imaginable, and the critical verdict came back cold. He took most of the following year away from acting, openly describing how much the role had taken out of him. So here's the pattern, laid out plainly. Outside the Spider-Man suit, Tom Holland's record is one outright bomb, one real hit carried by a pre-sold game and a co-star, and two prestige swings that never had to face a box office at all. And nowhere in that list is the one thing every studio is really looking for. A clean, undeniable data point that says, Tom Holland opened this film on his own name, and the people came. That absence is the whole problem. The $90 million problem. Here's how a green light really works. When a studio decides whether to spend serious money on a film, they don't guess. They look for comparisons. Similar films with similar stars in similar genres and exactly what those films earned. They build a model. They find the floor. Now try to build that model for Tom Holland outside of Spider-Man. What are the comparisons? A science fiction bomb that lost $70 million. A video game hit with an asterisk the size of Mark Wahlberg. Two streaming projects that never sold a ticket. There's no positive comparison to point at. There's no film an executive can hold up and say, look, when he leads, this is what it makes. And without that floor, the math gets nervous fast. A film budgeted around $80 or $90 million needs to gross well over $200 million worldwide just to break even once you fold in marketing. To risk that, a studio needs evidence that the lead can carry them there. For Tom Holland, outside the suit, that evidence doesn't exist. So at that budget level, the answer slowly becomes a quiet, careful no. And this is the part nobody says out loud. Because it almost never gets said out loud. When a project like that falls apart, the official reason is always something gentle. Creative differences, scheduling conflicts. The script needed another pass. Those phrases aren't exactly lies, but underneath them, very often, sits a spreadsheet and a number and a name that the number couldn't justify. The euphemism is the tell. When Hollywood goes quiet on a star at a certain budget, the silence is the verdict. So how did it happen? How does a billion-dollar actor end up with a value that nobody wants to test? It comes down to 4 traps, and the cruel part is that he walked into most of them by being too good at one single job. The first trap is the franchise itself. The Spider-Man suit did more than make Tom Holland famous. It convinced everyone, including the people writing the checks, that he was already a proven movie star. So nobody felt any need to slowly build the ordinary non-franchise track record that actually proves it. He skipped the step. He jumped straight to billion-dollar expectations with no foundation underneath them. And when that foundation was finally tested, it wasn't there. The second trap is his face. Tom Holland is 29 years old. On screen, he still reads as a teenager. And this isn't a small thing. It's something critics themselves have pointed at directly. Reviewers of The Crowded Room noted that his youthful look fights against the heavy adult roles he keeps reaching for. The traditional leading man molds, the action hero, the romantic lead, the weathered everyman, don't fit cleanly onto him yet. What's left is the role of the young man finding himself, and you can only play that one for so long. The third trap is the body, and this one is almost unfair. He's small, lean, and built for the acrobatics of a teenage superhero. For Peter Parker, that physique is a gift. For nearly every other leading role at the top of the box office, it works against him. Picture the men who dominate that space. They project size, weight, physical command of a room. Holland still moves the way Spider-Man moves, quick and light and almost weightless. The very thing that made him perfect for the suit is the thing that makes the suit so hard to escape. And the fourth trap was money. During the streaming boom, platforms like Netflix and Apple spent enormous sums chasing famous names. Because a famous name moved a needle in a boardroom, whether or not it moved a single ticket. That wave lifted Holland's price far faster than his theatrical results ever justified. His fee climbed. His producing deals grew. And then the boom ended, the budgets tightened, and the industry was left holding a price tag that the real evidence could no longer support. Now, before you decide the story is over, that Tom Holland is finished outside the suit, stop. Because this is where his case becomes truly different from every other trapped star. And this is the part you'll want to be here for. So if you're finding this interesting, take a second and subscribe, because what happens this summer is about to settle an argument that Hollywood has been having quietly for years. Here's the twist. Most actors stuck in this trap fade out slowly, quietly, over a decade. Tom Holland is about to get the 2 biggest tests of his entire career back-to-back in the same month. On July 17th, Christopher Nolan releases The Odyssey, a $250 million epic shot on brand-new IMAX technology, adapting Homer himself. Holland plays Telemachus, the son of Odysseus. It's the most prestigious film he has ever been a part of. But look closely at how he's positioned in it. He is not the lead. Matt Damon is Odysseus, and the cast stacked around him is enormous. Anne Hathaway, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, Charlize Theron, Lupita Nyong'o. And there's one more name on that call sheet, a name some of you already know very well. John Bernthal playing Menelaus. If you want the strange, hard-fought story of how Bernthal went from a canceled, written-off Punisher to a lead role in a Christopher Nolan epic, we covered exactly that, and it's one of the best comeback stories on this channel. I'll put it on screen for you now. So, The Odyssey is a test, but it's a protected one. If the film is a triumph, the credit gets shared across a dozen famous faces and the Nolan name. And if Holland disappears into that ensemble unnoticed, then the $90 million problem hardens into permanent fact. He officially becomes a supporting player in other people's films. Then, just 2 weeks later, on July 31st, comes the safe harbor. Spider-Man brand new day. The suit again. The one address where his value has never been in question. The one place that grosses reliably in the hundreds of millions. And there's one last piece, the most human one of all. For years now, Holland has been trying to make a Fred Astaire biopic. It's his real passion project, a return to his dancing roots, the film he has wanted to make more than any other. And it keeps slipping out of reach. But here's the detail the rumor mill usually gets wrong. The biggest obstacle to that film is not his box office. In late 2025, Fred Astaire's widow sent a legal letter making clear that the estate had never authorized the film, pointing to Astaire's own explicit wish never to be portrayed on screen. The dream stalled. But that one stalled for a reason that has nothing to do with whether Tom Holland can sell a ticket. So where does all of this leave him? The $90 million problem is real. Right now, today, outside of the Spider-Man suit, there is no hard evidence that Tom Holland can open a film on his name alone. And the industry has quietly built its plans around that fact. Lower fees, shared billing, big ensembles, streaming deals, a safety net stretched under everything he does. But a problem is not a sentence. He's 29 years old. He is, by almost every account, a real talent. And in a matter of weeks, 2 films are going to tell us more about his true worth than the last 5 years combined. So here's the question I want to leave you with. The same one the studios are asking right now behind closed doors. Is Tom Holland a box office liability outside of Spider-Man? Or is he simply an extraordinary actor that Hollywood has never figured out how to use without a net? After this July, we're going to know. So tell me where you land in the comments right now before the films come out, and let's see who called it. And subscribe, because the moment those Odyssey numbers land, we are doing the follow-up. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what they reveal.